So I actually love doing surround mixes. And there's another website based out of Denmark called Surround Music One. So the words surround music and then .1, like it's a .com.
Yeah.
So Surround Music One is selling surround mixes for a lot of different artists directly, and they are wonderful. It's one person, a wonderful, honest person, and so people can also get all my albums in 5.1, at least the ones that I can do.
I got you. Also, on the other hand, Spotify, you get paid 1/6 of 100 or 6. What's called 0006.
That's right.
Right. So how can it be more fair for people? Because you know they are right. They're the producer. They are the musician, and and then you need to have, like in your case, you have, I don't know, 30,000 hits up, streams a month. That is like $6, $10, $20 a month. That's how can the system get better for everybody? Every musician that I talk to complain about this. What's the alternative?
Bandcamp is the alternative.
Yeah, Bandcamp thought about it. Okay, here we need to get it that area there.
Right, get people to Bandcamp. So Spotify is essentially it's artistic colonialism. You know what it is? It's like a colonial nation going to a nation like Chile and taking all of the resources out of it and leaving people like slaves.
Yeah.
Right. And then if somebody like Allende comes up, then they have to go and kill them because there's no longer a way to steal all the goods from them anymore. That's
right, yeah.
So Pinochet comes in and says, okay, here you can have your slaves now, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
You know your thing. Yeah, absolutely. Right.
So what we're talking about is corporate imperialism, and it's methods for record companies to regain their control over artists as serfs, essentially, as a kind of servant. And some of us just want to be independent, and we've lived our careers entirely self-made, and nobody is an island, of course. Nobody is completely self-made. If I didn't have, face it, first of all, I'm a Caucasian male in a first world nation with enough affluence that if I fail, I'm not going to be homeless and sleeping on the street. So those things are, of course, a big head start, right? And so we have to be real about our own blessings and the fact that we don't create ourselves from a vacuum. However, to empower ourselves as much as possible and to empower all individual artists, including those that aren't lucky like I was, it's very essential, I think, to show them how to run their own business and run their own career professionally and not become slaves to some faceless corporation. Right now, we're in a time when the famous artists are mostly signing what they call 360 contracts, 360 like a full circle, 360 degrees, where essentially the record company owns their image, they own their website, they own any film rights to what they do, they own percentages of all the concerts they perform. And essentially what happens is instead of music, they become a media brand, right? So it's not that you're Beyonce. You might as well be Nike. You know what I mean? Because even though there's a lot of creativity going on, there's a lot of creativity, I'm sure, making shoes as well. But there's not a whole lot of difference as far as the amount that corporations own Beyonce or Jay-Z or anybody like that. I mean, this is why the ones that became very popular and wealthy are the ones that start their own publishing companies, right? That's why a lot of these folks like, Diddy Combs and all of these folks end up starting fashion companies and starting their own record labels because they see where the money is, right? That's why they started Tidal, which hasn't been able to compete. But you see what I'm talking about is that I don't want to think like that. I don't want to think like a corporation. I'm making music because I want to communicate magic and energy to people. And it has nothing to do with money except making enough to live a middle-class existence, right? Enough to survive, to pay the bills and to stay healthy, right? So if I can manage my career directly with a couple thousand listeners and have this communication purely on an energetic level, on a substantive level, dealing with the poetry and the beauty and the magic and the power of art, then we can empower other people to do similar things, I think. And things like Spotify, and now I would say even things like Apple Music, even though iTunes was a wonderful gift for artists for 10 or 15 years, they've pulled it away now because they saw how much money could be made without doing that, right? So now Apple Music is essentially just a version of Spotify, as is Google. YouTube pays even worse than Spotify. So, but I'm philosophical about it. I don't obsess about the money questions, except making sure that I break even on my projects or make a little bit, hopefully. And I also understand that there's people throughout the world that rely on YouTube in order to hear my music. I can give you a little story. When I was in Vietnam in November to perform, one of the reasons I got that gig was that people knew my music in Vietnam, listening to it on YouTube. Oh. And the organizers of the festival sort of assigned people to babysit the artists and make sure we didn't get into trouble or go eat bad food and get sick and things like that. And so there were these college kids basically taking us to dinners and making sure that we were getting to where we needed to be, and interviews and all of this kind of thing. We had handlers, as it were. And this 20-year-old college student said that she would study for her tests and exams and papers listening to my album Somnium, the sleep music, on YouTube.
Wow.
And she didn't have any money. She was a college student in Hanoi, so you're not going to go and support all these artists if you're a college student in Vietnam. And I understand that. And I think that there's a role for these, for these services to provide streaming and to legitimize free music for people all around the world. And I don't expect to see money from that. I've never expected. Just like back when we were selling records in the 1980s, I knew that there were bootleggers in Russia, right? You'd put anything out, it would immediately get bootlegged in the Soviet Union. And you're just philosophical about it because you know that they're not going to be customers anyway, right? They don't have the money to buy it. And so there's always that side of what I do where I understand that there's a lot more people without the money to have the luxury of buying music. As long as the systems in place allow the people who do have the money to support their artists to get some encouragement to do that and to actually be able to do it easily. And I think Bandcamp creates an environment where people want to support the people they like. It's an amazing skill with humans that if you suggest to them a behavior in a context or in an environment, they will often follow that behavior because we are social animals and we like to be approved. We like to get approval. And so, if you call the same thing that Bandcamp does, if you just called it, freemusic.com and you offer the fact that people could pay $7 or $9 for a download or get it for free, which they can do on Bandcamp too. They can just listen to music on Bandcamp all day long without paying for it, but they don't call it that, right? And so people don't do it that way. They actually follow the suggestion of creating community and supporting their artists.
Yeah,
and that's a wonderful thing about humanity is that we follow.
It's a beautiful concept, and also from a sort of psychologically or maybe sociology point of view, some artists have named your own price, so you can put 50 cents or $8 or whatever, right? And people, I think they try to go toward the high end. If I have the mean, it will be very unfair. I will feel bad about donating $1 to this guy that put the music together instead of the $7 or whatever, or $8 they can afford. So although it says name your own price, most of the people, I think, they go toward the high end.
I've done name your price on a couple albums as an experiment. Last year, during the height of lockdown, I did an album that was intended really to relax people because during a very stressful time. So my album, Offering to the Morning Fog, is specifically, really, it's utility music. It's designed to be very calm and deep and beautiful. And a lot of people were out of work during the beginning of the pandemic, and a lot of people, you know, in service jobs and things, who often are lovers of music too, they had no money or no income. And so I made that one, Name Your Price. And it was about equally split. A lot of people paid $1 or nothing. You know, I'm sure, because if you pay nothing, you can download it, but you don't get it on your Bandcamp player. It's not part of your library, but you can have it on your hard disk, which is okay. I really wanted to give that one away. Also, in March this year, I did a live concert for free basically on YouTube. And the concert is on YouTube, and it's basically free. And so I made it free on Bandcamp. I made it Name Your Price. Interestingly, the hardcore fans, the ones that would be the first one to buy the CD, they'll pay $10 or $20 because they're really supporting. They want me to keep making music. But then hundreds of other people will get it for free or just for $1. And that's okay, because on those particular releases, I'm saying, look, it's free. Take it. And
whatever you can afford, right?
That's right. I also have a couple very experimental things on there. I have a piece that's part of an experimental installation thing I called The Hours, and it's called Frozen Day. And it's been free ever since. I mean, I had it free when I first did it. I did it on my 50th birthday about 8 years ago. And it's one 24-hour period compressed into 1 hour exactly. And it's an experimental piece. It's not music, really. It's just sound. It's pure. The day kind of turns into a drone. It's like a gong, and so you get to hear the spectrum of sound that's in a 24-hour cycle. But that was free because it was never intended to be commercial, right? It was always purely an experimental thing to share, and I figured people would be confused by it anyway.
That's great. In 1992, you have, I think, you form a group called Amoeba, I think. Yeah. How did it go with that? And you released like 3 albums with the band, right?
Yeah. Well, you have to remember, I grew up in the punk scene in the late 70s also, and I skipped out on my high school graduation to see Throbbing Gristle's last concert. And I was playing in a band in high school with these guys playing improvised experimental music. It sounded very weird and surreal and noisy, and we only performed live a couple times. But these people remain my best friends to this day. They're like brothers. And Rick Davies was one of those people, and he was working at a synthesizer company at the time called Sequential. Another friend, Andrew McGowan, was working at Sequential Circuits, and Rick and Andrew and I started sorry, I'm stumbling over the words, started a band called Urdu in college, when I was in college. They were all 5 years older than me. And so Urdu played around the Bay Area a few times. We were very strange. It was loud and just really weird. But that's how Amoeba started. Rick Davies and I wanted to attempt a group again in the late 80s. But then Rick had to leave. See, he moved away for a period of time, working in the magazine industry. And so he wasn't around for me to work with. So I tried some other good friends, including Andrew McGowan, part of Urdu. And we did an EP in 1990 that was really quirky. I mean, it was loud and, it was a little punky kind of. The references for me were like The Residents, Tuxedo Moon, maybe Robin Hitchcock and the Soft Boys, Hawkwind, loud psychedelic music and very, very disturbing at times. But got that out of my system, and it was a bit embarrassing because my sense of humor does not translate very well. It's a bit uncomfortable. People just, I think, were afraid for my sanity. And but then Rick came back into town. He moved back to the Bay Area, and we started a more serious Amoeba then. And the 2 albums that came out on record labels, Watchful and Pivot, really were as much influenced by Rick's fondness for a good melody and a good chord progression. He's a guitarist and would write much more traditional style songs. And then I would bring more of my own sensibilities of production and sound design to it. And for better or for worse, I was the singer. I don't have a big voice at all. It's a scratchy, thin, high voice. And I was always very self-conscious about my singing, but I knew no other way to communicate these ideas in the lyrics. I looked for other singers, but they never had the feeling I was going for, which was a strange kind of quiet, introverted feeling. And so, as I said, for better or for worse, I ended up singing. And I'm not the best vocalist by any means. I'm also very shy on stage. And so I could never perform as a singer in Amoeba. We never did live concerts after the early 80s in Urdu when I was in college, when I could get the guts to go do that. But the more serious music.
Yeah, good. I understand. And I was able to, I went up. So the last point on Spotify, right? From my point of view, right? I'm a consumer, right? I pay $10 a month or whatever that is, $9.95, whatever that is. And I'm able to discover a lot of musicians that otherwise I couldn't have, right? So I can go to, let's say, the machine learning algorithm in Spotify much better than Bandcamp. In Bandcamp, I can pick one, and then if you like Tangerine Dream, at the bottom they recommend this guy, that guy, that guy, and from there I can listen to that and so forth. But it's more complex than searching. In Spotify, if you like that kind of music, I'll do like a daily mix of Peter Gabriel or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I can discover a lot. So it brings a good service for me, right? It brings a very good service.
Totally. Well, and I'm sure that people will continue to find the Amoeba albums in the future. It was not a huge success for me, I think, because by that time I had already developed a pretty large footprint as an instrumental electronic musician, ambient. And so, I made it very clear that it wasn't my solo music, and it was that it had song structures and lyrics and everything. And people were polite. I think that'd be the word I'd describe it. Very few people were offended by it. But it was very much coming from this introverted territory. I mean, Rick Davies and I were both extremely influenced by Robert Wyatt, for example. The album Rock Bottom is, I think, both of one of our favorite albums. And the last album that Talk Talk did, Laughing Stock, which I think is one of the greatest albums ever recorded.
Agree with you.
Yeah. So Laughing Stock, of course, influenced a lot of other bands. I'm sure that groups like Steve Roach, and I know Bark Psychosis was hugely influenced by Talk Talk. In fact, Lee Harris, the drummer, ended up playing with Bark Psychosis. Orang, which is some of the same musicians also. This English scene of I guess they were calling it post-rock for a period of time. Very strangely dissolved rock music, I used to imagine it where you would take a song and imagine it being like a piece of yarn or a rope. And then these albums are sort of like taking all the threads of the yarn apart until it sort of becomes this strange fabric of loose threads and then kind of reassembling it into some weird fabric. And to me, I adore that style of reconstituted songwriting, rebuilt from the ground up, and that's Amoeba was very much in that territory.
The way you describe that remind me of string theory. If you're
yes,
but they're very interesting. So I was listening to Spotify, and I want to bring to attention 3 different tracks, and feel free to elaborate. One is comes from the album Nest, and it's called the track Generosity of Solitude. And feel free to elaborate, how that composition came together. It's a beautiful piece, man.
Thank you. Well, all of Nest flows as one piece. It's pretty much a 1 hour long composition. And it came out of my need for something quieter than silence. And there was a reason for that. I'd been performing a lot, and I'd been playing larger and larger festivals, including some of these psytrance festivals, where a lot of like really heavy electronic music. And of course, I was on the chill stage playing, like more my music, which is kind of more of I would play my most active music, which was kind of world music influenced, dubby electronica, but much more organic, of course. And yet these environments were so loud. And my wife and I spent 1 month in Australia in January and February 2012. And I played about 8 concerts, 4 of them at big festivals like Rainbow Serpent and Earth Dance and these kinds of things. And when I was there, I did a lot of nature recording also. Whenever I travel, I try to bring a good recorder. And so I had these amazing sounds of nature, on the east coast of Australia, near Brisbane especially. Mullaney had these tree frogs that were up in, I didn't realize that there was a kind of tree frog that actually could lay their eggs in trees themselves rather than in a puddle, of course, because they're amphibians. They need water to have the tadpole, right? But what they would do is they would create this bag of spit, of saliva, and lay their eggs in each little bubble of spit. And then the rain would fill up this bag and make it like a floating pond. And their mucus would hold it together in the air on the tree. And we were in a house, we were staying at a friend's house in Mullaney, who was also a musician. He was one of the musicians in the festival. And I heard these chirping sounds and this dripping. And I went outside in the night and you could see the drips coming from these bags up in the air. And the frogs were chirping and the tadpoles were actually above my head. And I had never seen this before. And I thought it was extravagantly beautiful because nature is just so, it's profligate. Nature just creates and creates and creates. And I found it to be very magical. I had those kinds of experiences in Australia. Came back home and I had a few months to prepare for another tour here in the States. I was going to drive around the country for 2 months and do 20 concerts. The problem is that my ears were ringing. I started to get tinnitus because of all this loud music and because I was on stage with in-ear monitors. And so I was getting these ringing and pitches and stuff. And I was also just tired. I was really, really tired and too much social interaction. And I just needed to create music to hide. And so really the title Nest is exactly what I was trying to create, a womb to hide in, a cushion, a cocoon. And so I started by creating just a 1-hour timeline of those recordings I had made in Australia of cicadas and frogs and rain and birds. And then I just basically made the slowest, emptiest sound that I possibly could to fill the spaces with little dots, In fact, the piano parts on that album are entirely half speed. So I played those parts and then slowed them down 1 octave. And so I actually was playing everything an octave higher and twice as fast.
Yeah.
But I wanted the sustain of the piano to just be into silence, just to be into that empty space. And the album came together very quickly. I got it mostly finished and then I went on tour. And then in summertime, I got back from that tour and I finished the album in about a month. So it came out very quickly. And it was all about the need for emptiness and the need for silence. And a lot of, I think, my own experience of the world is like that. The world for me is sometimes very loud. And I often just need to create something that buffers from the world. And for that reason, I think my music ends up being introverted and quiet. Even my more active albums take a long time to develop. The music has a fair amount of space and it doesn't project itself very strongly at you. It's really, for me, it's trying to invite other people into my quiet world because the world out there for me is sometimes just a bit too much. And so the music, instead of pushing to be as loud as the rest of the world, is simply inviting to come in and to be as quiet as this world is. It's an invitation.
I know exactly what you mean, man. I know. Now that I was thinking about Australia, and I know you have done some film score as well. Do you know the movie by Peter Weir called The Last Wave?
It's one of the best movies ever made.
Oh man, okay. Yeah. I want to this.
Peter Weir is incredible. His early films, The Last Wave and Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Yeah.
And even The Year of Living Dangerously and a couple of his other early films are astonishing. I mean, even if you see
right, yeah.
His first American film, Witness, even had the same intensity of somebody who doesn't understand the complexity of the world that they're entering. The Last Wave is incredible.
I have seen that. I have seen that. I don't know, 6 or the time.
Yes.
And of course, I don't know about how movies are made or cinematography, or I don't know but for music, right? The soundtrack was unbelievable. It's unbelievable, man.
Peter Weir is awesome, and absolutely. And Australia is a mysterious place, and the indigenous people there have a continuous culture of 40,000 years, and those of us from European backgrounds have really no concept of that. So I think that the Europeans who came to Australia didn't quite know what they were stepping into, and I still think they don't understand what they've got there. In any case, so you had asked about the concepts of that song, and really that song is part of that story of a continuity, of a continuum of invitation into a very silent place. But the titles are a specific story, which is the story of, I guess you'd call it my own, one of the elements of my own mythology or something. Let's say a certain symbology that I use to help me to understand our relationship to our spiritual history as well as our mythical history. And that is this idea of Eden, which comes back in so many religions. The idea that we were expulsed from paradise at some point isn't just in the Bible. It's not just in the Old Testament, but it's also in Native American lore and in Hindu mythology and other very ancient religions. This idea of a fall from paradise, or a fall from greatness to lownness, because people thousands of years ago were trying to figure out why it's such a mess here. Why is this so ugly? Why does this hurt so much? And so they created this metaphor of being expulsed from paradise. And I think that from a Jungian perspective, that metaphor has nothing to do with a physical paradise. It has nothing to do even with God. It has entirely to do with the separation that we create in our consciousness between us and everything. So it's the splitting, which is really the more Gnostic conception of God as I am, as Yahweh, as to be. And the Gnostics would say, heretically, of course, that God was in a more pure form before Yahweh occurred, before he said, let there exist, before he said existence will occur separate from me. And so this idea of the expulsion of Eden is actually something that we do to ourselves every waking moment of our life with language, because our language separates me from you, and it separates verbs from nouns, and it assumes that there's this thing in the world that is separate from me and that things are somehow stable, whereas in fact the world is constant flux, and there's no such thing as a noun. Everything is entirely a verb. Everything is constantly changing, and there's no such thing as me, because I'm
right.
constant.
I know exactly. Yeah, I know exactly. So, I don't know if you mentioned Carl Gustav Jung. I don't know if you had the opportunity to be in Kushnat, with the inscription that he has in the wall. I don't know. Look it up. You can go to Google, and it's a very, if you like Carl Gustav Jung, it's a beautiful experience to be there and visit the museum and the description that he did on the wall. The guy was another person way ahead of his time as well.
Absolutely. Well, so if you read this, the titles of Nest as a kind of poem, and the poem is one of wandering our life, basically, that as we leave the womb into life, we become a wanderer, memories of wandering, and we keep within us this memory of home. And the home is the essence of before we separated ourselves from everything. It's the essence of existence. And everything else in between is the journey. And the journey is like a homeless person, which is why moss carpet sky blanket.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Another song, another track is Sagrada Familia from the album Gaudí. It's a beautiful, also beautiful.
And when I did that album,
yeah.
When I did that album, of course, the Sagrada Familia was still without a roof. It was still just a few spires. And now I haven't been to Barcelona, but I've seen pictures of it, and they've got a roof now. It's astonishing. So no, Gaudí for me was a metaphor of the perfect marriage of the organic and the mathematical, because he had found intuitive ways of balancing structures using gravity. He did it by, you know, taking strings at the height that he wanted to build, flipping them upside down and putting weights on them, and then taking photographs of the way that those catenary arches were being held by the weights. And he had this intuition that if you flip that thing upside down and followed that same curve with stone, it would support itself.
Yep.
And it does, even if it's as high as a skyscraper like Sagrada Familia. And that kind of intuitive mathematics is very much the way I think about my music, which is somehow a poetry that involves relationships that are very sophisticated, but it's also very much a kind of sleepwalking in a strange way. It's an automatic writing almost. It's very naive in its own way.
Another track, it came from the album of Journey. I don't know how to pronounce that word correctly. Suspension.
Try to say the album name again.
Yearning.
Yearning. Yeah.
Yearning. Suspension.
So that's the album with Lisa Moscow.
Yeah.
And this is the concept of that album was that I love Indian music, and I love especially the alap, which is the introductory part of a raga before the rhythm comes in. And I in here in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's a college of classical Indian music, the Ali Akbar School of Music, started by Ali Akbar Khan, one of the great sarod players. And I've known some of the people, including I had Ali Akbar Khan's son, his youngest son, play on Gaudí. And so, you know, there's this dialogue that we have with classical Indian music here, and it's a huge, huge influence for me. And I wanted to create this album of nothing but alap, and I couldn't find an Indian musician who understood quite what I was talking about, because I didn't want tambura. I wanted the electronics to be the drone. And so that album was basically, I found a European ethnicity, classically Indian trained sarod player, Lisa Moscow, who had studied for 15 years with Ali Akbar Khan. And she liked my idea. And so I recorded her improvising for about 4 hours, I think, over 2 different days. And then I edited her playing together into those 6 pieces that are on Yearning.
Yeah.
One piece is a solo piece. But
do you like Dead Can Dance, Brendan Perry?
I do, yeah. For different reasons, I find myself not listening to them that much, but I do. I might be very strange in that I think I like their first album the best, when they kind of sounded like Joy Division.
It's very good. It's very good stuff. There's a solo album. I think I remember. Let me check here from Brendan Perry. I think let me see. It is. I think the album is Arc. I think for 2010, and it's very good. Different than the stuff that he does as with Dead Can Dance, but it's very interesting. What's your favorite Werner Herzog movie? And if you can pick up one.
Oh, probably. Well, gosh, there's so many good ones, but probably Aguirre, Wrath of God.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
But also Fitzcarraldo, which is such a mad piece of film.
Yeah.
And Heart of Glass. But one that's very strange is Kaspar Hauser. It's also called like Home in the World or something like that. And it's about somebody whose parents had kept him closed up in a room for most of his adult life, and when they die, he kind of leaves the house, and he's a complete ingenue. He doesn't know anything about the world, and he's a very tragic character, but he goes into this world knowing nothing. And it's a beautiful piece of film. No, Herzog is astonishing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable guy. He's one of those characters, like, like I'm not surprised that Popol Vuh and Bernie Herzog and that collaborated for that many years, right? Because that that kind of movie required that kind of music, if you will. And what was the experience? I don't have that many questions left. What was the experience to work with Steve Roach? I know you guys have done a couple albums, right? Strata and the Soma.
Yeah, Strata and Soma. We've been friends since the mid-1980s, and we're still friends. Steve and I, and some others in our cohort group, Michael Stearns and a few others, are, we stay at each other's houses when we travel and things like that. I haven't actually seen Steve much in the last few years. The last time I saw him in person might have been when he came and saw me perform in Tucson, probably 3 years ago. But we're just brothers. I mean, he's a soulmate, and I respect him deeply. I think he's astonishing at how creative he flows. Working with him is like jumping onto a freight train and just holding on, because he is. Oh, well, I mean, he's got a very strong directive. He's got a very strong sense of himself and what he's good at. And you work with him knowing that you're in that world, you're in his world. When we were working together, so the story of our friendship, my first concerts in Los Angeles happened in 1985, the summer of 85. And I had a installation to do for a theater piece down there. And also I was playing a gig at a club, one of my kind of more noisy electronic music things, at a place called the Anti-Club. And Stephen Hill from Hearts of Space had befriended me, and he was playing my music on his radio show at the time. And I had told him on the phone that I was going to go to Los Angeles and do these things. And he said, when you're there, you really should meet Steve Roach, because you guys will get along great. And I didn't know his music at the time. This was in 1985, and I had released 3 or 4 albums, and he had released 3 or 4 albums. I think his album, Structures from Silence, had just come out. And my albums, Trances and Drones, had come out previously. And he was getting a little bit bigger than me, much faster, but I was, a cohort in the same years. And we went and had lunch together when he was down in LA, and we got along great. I mean, we were both Hawkwind fans, and we both had pet iguanas and a few other things that we shared in common. And we just stayed friends. And so a couple of years later, I was working on my album Geometry, and I sent him some of the rhythms that I had worked on for the album. And he said he really liked them, and he was wondering if I could do something like that for him. And he could trade me by helping me mix the album, because he had a better studio than I did. I was still living on college money. I didn't have much money at all. And he had a decent recording studio at the time that he could do a better mix. And so I recorded some drum patterns and loops for his album that became Dreamtime Return. And in return, he helped me mix a few pieces on Geometry, which didn't come out for another few years after that. I couldn't find a label for Geometry at the time. But, we got along really well. And he asked if I wanted to play rhythm on another album that he did with Michael Stearns. And I played some Doombeck on that album. And it was just a friendship. And so we decided we would do an album together. And we did that in 1990 after my album Rainforest came out. And Rainforest was one of the best-selling albums on the label at the time. So Stephen Hill had started a record label then, and he had managed to sell 50,000 copies of Rainforest. And so he's like, yeah, why don't you guys do an album?
Yeah, of course. Another 100,000 now. 2 great artists, 50,000 times 2, right?
Yeah, so we did Strata, and our lives were changing a lot. Steve was getting a divorce that same year, so we took a 6-month hiatus while he moved out to Tucson. And my wife and I bought a house that same year, and so we moved from an apartment to this new house that we had, which is right here, in fact, where I still am 32 years later. And so we were finding we were both struggling to find something that felt deep and earthy. It wasn't space music. We didn't want this Germanic reference like Tangerine Dream or like Klaus Schulze and this idea of cosmic. And there was so much music also at the time that was still in that loop, like still with sequencers and minor key melodies. And we were trying very, very hard to find a language that would speak directly at a kind of energetic level, a shamanic level. And that did involve using simple acoustic instruments and ancient instruments. And I had been playing flute and drums, and that worked out well. And Steve had picked up the didgeridoo when he was in Australia. And so I think what happened is that we were both forming a very special language, which became unique. It became special. And it became what people ended up calling tribal music, or, which I don't really feel comfortable with, because I'm not a tribal person. I think that there's a certain amount of cultural appropriation that we need to be cautious about, and I don't really want to appropriate things that I'm not familiar with as a cultural background, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
But instead of trying to directly copy music from other cultures, what we tried to do is find a language that was specific to ourselves and which worked within the electronic music vocabulary that we had developed, using these acoustic instruments and using instruments that had a history of shamanic use and energy attached. And that became a language, I think, and it became something that people recognized during the 1990s. And I think personally that our album Soma, we nailed it perfectly. I think that was at the time, still probably one of the best things I've ever done.
Yeah, no, absolutely, very well done. If you could pick, you and your wife will start a fire or whatever the scenario, and you need to go to an island. Only God, if God exists, I don't know, allow you to pick 3 albums, 3 CDs or 3 vinyl, no yours. What 3 would be? You go to an island, you're not going back to your house.
3 albums, 3 albums, not mine, you said?
Yeah, no yours, right, of course.
So this is the desert island disc question.
Yeah.
Gosh, 3 albums. Of course, it would entirely depend on my mood. And the problem is, once I've listened to an album more than 10 times or so, I'm so familiar with it. But it would probably be, so one of them would be Terry Riley's Shriek Hamel, probably.
Yeah.
Another one would probably be, I suppose Talk Talk's Laughing Stock, actually. And maybe another one, gosh, there's so many other possibilities, but it would probably be Robert Wyatt's Rock Bottom.
Yeah, wow, those are 3 choices. Yeah. And so the last 2 questions, where are your plans for the near future, the next, I don't know, 6 months, a year? What you have done so much and released so much and worked with so many great artists. Is anything left in the tank, so to speak, that you want to do? I'm quite sure you, like me, have 20 ideas running in your head at the same time.
Sometimes I have surprisingly few ideas. You'd be amazed.
Really, yeah.
Sometimes I can just be blank. But I have a new album in the works that's going to be very sparsely rhythmic.
Yeah.
And you can see if I turn this way.
Yeah.
There's a surround microphone. This is a ambisonic 4-channel trapezoidal microphone that then I'm picking up some gongs and things with it. That's part of the rhythm approach to this next album.
Yeah.
I'm also talking with a friend who's a guitarist in Italy about doing a collaboration album together. And just hoping to stay alive and to not lose my coherent my thinking. It's funny because my family has a history of Alzheimer's, and
really? Yeah.
I've dealt with that with my parents. They're gone now, of course, but I look at the possibilities of being, a very real possibility that I might be just a big drooling puddle in 15 years. So I need to think very much about how to make the most of a very. You start realizing when you get older that time is very short, and we might plan our life out until we're 80 or 90 years old, but it might not give us that much.
Well,
So,
there's a lot of new. Where I read that, I don't know, I don't remember, but there's a lot of new drugs and new research doing in Alzheimer in the last 5 years.
I'm optimistic that I'll live long enough for something, but
So
in the
maybe
meantime,
in the next 5 years, 10 years, or they
can
will
hope.
discover a pill or a medicine or therapy to keep prolonging the life. And last question: where our buyers, our listeners can buy your music, and feel free to elaborate your Bandcamp or your website.
By all means, come to robertrich.com. If you know how to spell my name, you can find it. And you can listen to most of my new music right on that website. It connects straight to Bandcamp. Also, my wife runs a secure order form that you can link to from that website. And we fill all the orders here. You can ask for signatures and all of that. So there's a new vinyl record, Neurogenesis, is out. Vinyl. And it's running a bit slow, but hopefully it'll show up in Amazon even and distribution at some point. But in the meantime, it is available on Bandcamp, and it is available directly on our website. And I printed 500, and I've sold almost 200 now. So it's only, I imagine it'll be out of print within about a year.
I got you.
So,
Robert, thank you again for your time. We talked almost close to 2 hours, and man, I'm quite sure we can talk for hours and hours and hours, because we are very similar in many ways, the way we think about music and the world and psychology and neuropsychology and different things. It was a real pleasure, and I will talking to you, and you have so many musicians. I'm quite sure I will send you another email to see if you can put me in touch with other people as well, because I want to interview as many people as possible. And then definitely I want to buy some of your music as well. So I will send you a separate email, and
actually
we'll
just
coordinate that.
Come straight to my wife's order form and we can set you up.
Thank you very much again, man. Thank you a lot to your wife, and thank you very much, and stay healthy, man. It's very, very nice talking to you, man.
This has been a pleasure, and thank you for everybody who's still listening to this long, rambling conversation.
No, it wasn't rambling. It was very structured. Thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Claudio.
No problem.